All right, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being here in person. My name is Megan Peters, and it is my great honor and privilege to welcome you to the first in-person CCN since 2019. Okay, so we're really happy that you're all here. I hope that you have been having so much fun so far reconnecting with people in person, and that is what this conference is all about, is reconnecting and having good scientific communication in 3 dimensions. As you all know, the goal of this conference is to develop computationally defined models of brain information processing that can explain rich measurements of brain activity and behavior, and to do so in an interdisciplinary manner. So to bring together artificial intelligence, computational neuroscience, and all of the in-between spaces to come to a combined understanding of the complex nature of the brain. And the conference this year has been put together specifically to do exactly that, with the help of a great many wonderful people. So this conference would not be possible without all of the people that I'm going to show you on the screen right now. So we have the executive committee led by Thomas. We have the communication committee led by Lawrence, the program committee that I got to share with Layla, and the technical program committee, who was responsible for reviewing all of the abstracts and making sure that everyone got to the right place in the program. Also, you reviewed all of the abstracts, so I want to thank all of you for reviewing somewhere in the neighborhood of 7 or 8 abstracts in some cases. So thank you very much to the CCN community for participating in that process. And of course, we would be remiss if we did not also thank the sponsors that have made this program possible. So to all of the sponsors that have generously donated to make CCN a success this year and going forward, we are very grateful. And some of the events that you will participate in over the next few days are specifically sponsored by some of these organizations. So look out for that to help pay our respects and to show them our gratitude. Okay, so what events do we have for you over the next few days? We have a very full, very exciting program that is focused on those in-person, interactive types of events. So I'm sure you've all found the program already. It's on the website under the heading Program. But if you haven't and you would like to have it on your phone right now without typing a bunch of stuff, you can scan this code. And the program consists of a number of pieces. And so I wanted to introduce some of those event types right now because some of them are a little different than your classic one-person keynote and then contributed talks and posters conference. So you can probably guess by the chairs up here on the stage that we have a lot of interaction and a lot of conversation that we'll be doing. And the first conversations that we had have already happened. So if you participated in the mind matching event, you know exactly what this is. This is actually about 50% of the people who are here, which is fantastic. We had over 100 people sign up, 160 people, sorry, sign up for the mind matching event, where we all met in groups of 4, rounds of 3, and we talked about the things that we have in common in science. And I hope that you all made some great new friends that you can now go through the conference with, share a meal, go visit their poster, watch their talk, and so on. And if you missed the mind matching event, or you popped in and you joined after the fact and you had a great time, and you think that this sounds like fun in the future, please scan this thing or come find me afterwards, and we will share how Neuromatch, which helped run the matching event this year, how Neuromatch is doing other matching events at other conferences in the future, and so you can participate in those. But this isn't the only in-person interaction type conversation that we'll be doing at CCN. We'll be doing the generative adversarial collaboration. So this is now the 3rd year that we have done these. These are workshops, essentially, that are proposed by the community. So several, up to sometimes 10 or even 15 people get together to identify a topic in the cognitive and computational neurosciences or related fields that is a controversy, and sometimes a long-standing controversy. And the purpose of these events is to get together people who are on opposite sides of the aisle and basically make them fight. So this is like a Thunderdome situation. But The goal is not to have someone win. The goal is to discuss how we can win, how we can move the conversation forward. So we have 3 of these generative adversarial collaborations for you during the program this year. 3 workshops that consist of long conversations that you can get involved in that will be happening right here, and you can go to the microphone and say, I have a question or I have a comment, and we encourage that very much. And if you'd like to read the proposals beforehand so you know what you're getting yourself into, those are all on the program website, so you can go and read the proposals that they put in. And then the cycle continues with the GACs. There will be papers written by these groups later and follow-ups at further CCN conferences. So there are actually a number of GAC posters from previous cycles that are downstairs or will be downstairs that you can go and see and follow up on. So that's one type of workshop that we're doing. Another type of conversation that we are having is the keynotes and tutorials. So I don't know about you, but when I've seen some really wonderful keynotes in the past, I often find myself very frustrated that I want to know how I made that pretty graph. I want to know what the code did. I want to know how they got that result. And you see this beautiful keynote, and then you can go read the supplementary material of a paper. But now we're going to do keynotes and tutorials where you get hands-on experience actually doing the coding. So come with your laptop charged up to those tutorial sessions so you can actually dig in, get your hands dirty, and figure out how to make the pretty graphs in the beautiful publications that the keynote speakers will be talking about. We also have keynotes and fireside chats. And these are new this year, and so this is the goal of these chairs up here, although we don't have a fireplace, unfortunately. But we have 3 keynote and fireside chats, and the goal of these is to get together 2 or 3 keynote speakers who will give shortened keynote talks around a central theme. And then we have a moderator who will also then guide a discussion, and we will leave time for that discussion. This is really important that you don't have just 2 or 3 minutes at the end for a couple questions, but you actually have a long, drawn-out discussion. And so we encourage all of you at the discussion portion of the keynote and firesides to head to the microphones in the aisles and ask your question. And try to direct your questions to maybe even all 2 or 3 of the speakers who are on the stage, so we can get multidisciplinary responses and discussions going. And we also have contributed talks. These are also thematically organized. We have 16 contributed talks. They are all by trainees, which is wonderful. And there will be a little bit of time at the end of those contributed talk sessions as well for some long discussion or longer discussion, 10 minutes or so, with all of the speakers so that we can have cross-cutting themes and discussions as well. And then, of course, the epitome of in-person conferences, posters. So we have over 200 posters that will cycle through 3 poster sessions downstairs. This is indoors, so please wear your mask, protect those around you, and protect yourself. But we have over 200 posters tonight, tomorrow night, and the next night. And inside your name tag, there are drink tickets. So please come back after dinner and grab a drink and come to those poster sessions. So this brings me to this, COVID safety. Please do wear a face covering at all of the indoor events as much as possible. Pull it down to take a sip of your coffee or water and put it back up. This is for your protection as well as the protection of those around you. I sound like an airline attendant. But despite the risk of COVID and despite the precautions that we need to take, we are so excited about this opportunity for in-person community building, for in-person discussions. Thank you so much for being here, for coming out and participating in this community. We hope that if you ask a question, if you stand at one of these microphones, that you let us know who you are, especially if you're a trainee. Say who you are and where you're from. Let's all get to know each other. Let's take advantage of seeing each other in 3 dimensions. And one wonderful idea that we had to bring the community together at the very last minute, and this was Lawrence's idea last night at dinner, was this, which is downstairs on one of the poster sessions. You know that we've all been telling you put a red dot on your name tag where you think you fall? Well, go and find this 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, which is very small. But please go find it and stick a pin in it where you think you fall. And then we'll take a picture at the end and we can look at the center of mass of the CCN community. So this is downstairs on the far side of the poster session there. So, okay. So I'm going to quickly then go through the introduction to our first event, which is the keynote and the first keynote and fireside chat. These keynote and fireside chats, as I said, are a way to have 2 to 3 speakers come together with a moderator around a common theme. These have been coordinated before CCN, actually, so there's been a lot of back and forth and a lot of resource sharing among all of the speakers over the past several months. So we hope that these will be really nice and interconnected talks that we'll get to enjoy. And they're interdisciplinary and thematically diverse, or interdisciplinary on purpose around that common theme. And there are a number of benefits that we have for the CCN community, and I'm not going to read out all of these, but they basically center, again, around this theme of interdisciplinary community building. Okay, so our first keynote and fireside chat is entitled The Neuroscience, Cognitive Science, and AI Approaches to Intelligent Complex Behavior. This is the Tian Qiao and Chrissy Chen keynote and fireside chat. It is moderated by Bill Newsome, and we have 3 keynote speakers for you. But before I call up Bill to moderate this, I would like to make a special announcement about 2 Chen Fellows who were selected for these merit-based awards. So I'm going to read out 2 names, and if you are in the audience, please come up and accept your certificate. So the first of the Chen Fellows is Seven Harutonian. Are you here? Wonderful. Come on up. As I run into stuff. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you. And here is your wonderful certificate. Okay. And we would also like to recognize Emily Mesk. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Emily, are you here? Wonderful. Congratulations. Yeah. Wonderful. Okay. And the Chen Fellows were selected from among all of the submitted abstracts for their merit and promise, for their scientific rigor. Okay, so with that, I'm going to stop, and I'm going to pass the baton to Bill, who will moderate our first keynote and fireside chat. And don't forget to get involved and ask questions at the end, folks. Can you get up from over there? Great.
I guess I have my own microphone.
You
so
do.
Thank you very much, Megan.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Thanks.
It's a pleasure to be here and a pleasure to moderate this session. We have 3 outstanding speakers, as you have heard, who are going to start putting the ingredients on the table that are going to form the stew of this meeting. So they'll get us off to a rip-roaring start. The way this is going to work is that each speaker is going to speak for 20 minutes, and that'll take an hour of time. And we encourage you to hold questions until the discussion period at the end. And ideally, be thinking about questions that might be applicable to 2 or 3, all 3 of the speakers. And we will do the discussion then. So I'm going to introduce each of the speakers now, and they can just rotate through quite quickly. So our first speaker in front of you right now, Chelsea Fenn, is assistant professor in computer science and electrical engineering at Stanford. So my colleague at Stanford, I come to meetings like this to meet my colleagues frequently. Chelsea's lab is also associated with the artificial intelligence and machine learning groups at Stanford. She studies intelligence through robotic interaction at scale and is particularly interested in the capability of robots and other agents to develop broadly intelligent behavior through learning and interaction. And she also spends time at Google as part of the Google Brain team. After Chelsea, our next speaker will be David Redish from the University of Minnesota. He's the Distinguished McKnight University Professor in the Department of Neuroscience. And he and his team explore the computational processes that underlie decision-making. His research addresses questions of addiction from the perspective of addiction's dysfunctions in decision-making processes, and his research interests span the entire breadth of the neurophysiology of behavior, including computational, experimental, theoretical, and clinical approaches. So we'll go from robotics and AI to neuroscience. And then coming on as our Cleanup hitter will be Ann Collins, who's associate professor in the Department of Psychology at UC Berkeley. And Ann studies multiple neurocognitive processes that contribute to learning, decision-making, and executive functions. She uses quantitative modeling at every step of the way and at different levels of description to study the computations performed and revealed through behavior. So to inform those quantitative theories and to test them, her lab performs behavioral as well as EEG, imaging, and developmental experiments in healthy or patient adult populations. So this is going to be a real treat. And Chelsea, I'm off the stage, and take it away, please.
Awesome. So today I'm going to talk a bit about ingredients for developing intelligent robots, and hopefully we'll hear about other ingredients for other kinds of intelligent behavior as well. So to start off, when I started working on robotics in my PhD, I started working with this robot right here. And our goal was to allow the robot to learn how to do tasks, so to learn behavior through trial and error. And in particular, what this video is showing here is that the video is learning a neural network, or the robot is learning a neural network that maps from images taken from the robot's camera to torques applied to the robot's joints. And as you can probably tell, the robot is trying to put the red block into the shape sorting cube. And at the very beginning of learning, its policy was not very good. And over the course of its trial and error, it is able to figure out a policy that can succeed pretty well at this task. And so here's a video of the final result. You can also see the robot's point of view in the bottom right here. And one of the things that's cool about these kinds of reinforcement learning algorithms is that you can apply them not just to learn a task like this, but also a range of other tasks. So the robot could learn how to place the claw of a hammer underneath a nail. The robot learned how to screw a cap onto a bottle with the same algorithm. And with an extension of the algorithm, we were able to allow the robot to use a spatula to lift an object into a bowl. So this is a fairly, a fairly classic kind of point of view of reinforcement learning where the robot is trying to learn through trial and error how to solve a particular task. We were pretty excited about this result at the time because we hadn't ever had robots learn these complex manipulation skills directly from raw perceptual inputs, directly from the images from the robot's camera. And other people at other labs were able to actually build upon these reinforcement learning algorithms to allow robots to do other things like hit a puck into a goal or open a door or throw a ball to hit a target. Now these kinds of reinforcement learning algorithms have also been applied to play games or learn how to walk in simulation as well. And overall, it seems like, at least at the time, I was very excited about progress in AI and in robotics, and it seemed like we had an approach that was fairly general and could allow robots to learn all sorts of things and ultimately be useful in the real world. But there's a bit of a catch, and I think we actually have a bit of a problem with this kind of approach. And the problem is that the robot in these videos, it didn't learn how to use spatulas to lift objects. It learned how to use that particular spatula to lift that object into that bowl in that room. The entire data, the only data that robot had seen was from that one narrow environment. And so in particular, in each of these scenarios, it's learning one task in one environment starting from scratch. This means that if you gave it a new spatula, if you gave the robot, a slightly different carpet color or a different ball that it needs to throw, the robot wouldn't be able to perform the task in those scenarios. So I would argue that the robots here are not very intelligent in some ways. And I guess maybe to kind of drive this point further, if you thought about kind of teaching humans to do these kinds of tasks, I think that this would be analogous to saying, kind of on day one, when a person is born, giving them a spatula and having them lift objects into a bowl. And this is pretty ridiculous when you think about it from this standpoint. And so since then, a lot of my research has been thinking about how we can allow robots to be more intelligent in a broader set of scenarios, and perhaps taking some inspiration from how humans learn. Humans don't learn tasks just in one environment. They learn from a breadth of experiences. They aren't just trying to solve one particular objective. And so what I'll talk about today is just a few ingredients that I think might be important for learning more general forms of behavior, more intelligent behavior. This is by no means exhaustive, but I'll maybe try to capture some of the things that I think are important and some of the steps that we've taken towards developing more intelligent robots. And the first thing that we want to be able to do is, instead of just training a robot to do one task, can we train a robot to do lots of different tasks? And lots of different tasks to the point in which it could actually perform a new task that it wasn't actually ever trained to do. What I mean by this is we'll have this robot right here, and our goal will be to give it a command like place the grapes in the ceramic bowl, and we want it to be able to perform this task without having seen any data of picking up the grapes and putting it into the bowl. And of course, we're going to give it data of related tasks, and so we're going to give it data of placing other objects, doing other things with the grapes, so it will have grasped the grapes and put it into the bin, for example, or it may have put the apple into the bowl or something like that, but it won't have ever seen any data of picking up the grapes and putting it into the green bowl. And to make things a little bit more difficult, we're actually going to also collect data across 2 different object sets, and a lot of our evaluation tasks are actually going to be involving objects across these 2 object sets, and so it won't ever have seen any data of grapes and the green bowl in the same scene. Great, so specifically what we're going to do to try to study whether robots can do tasks they weren't trained to do is we're going to collect data for 100 different tasks that cover 9 underlying skills. And the data that we collect will look something like this, where we're going to collect data by teleoperating the robot to do 100 different tasks. This will include things like placing the pepper in the white cup, or stacking the eraser on top of a sponge, or knocking over the eraser. And we're going to take this data and train a policy, a neural network policy, to map from the RGB image that the robot sees and the language command to the action that the robot should take. The action in this case will correspond to the 3D position, 3D rotation, and whether or not it should open and close its gripper, so there's 7 degrees of freedom. And the policy will operate at 10 hertz, meaning that it will make a decision 10 times every second based on the current image. This kind of policy is maximally general. We're not kind of imposing any sort of biases into this architecture. And I guess perhaps the only sort of bias that we're going to use is that we're going to actually, when we pass in this language command, we're going to use a pre-trained language embedding, which was pre-trained on lots of text data. Now, for the robot to be able to do a task it has never seen before, it needs to do a lot of different things. So first, it needs to be able to correctly interpret the language command. It needs to be able to identify relevant objects versus distractor objects in the scene from the image, and ultimately translate the instruction and the perception into the robot's action space. And it needs to be able to do this implicitly all within a single neural network function. And so I would argue that this is actually a pretty challenging problem. Great, so that was the gist of our approach. We trained the robot on 100 different tasks, and then we tried to see if the robot could generalize. So we gave it exactly the task that I mentioned before of placing the grapes in the ceramic bowl. And this is the policy being rolled out on the robot, and we see the robot can successfully do the task. And it can't just do that task, it can do other tasks too. So it can place the banana on the white sponge, place the bottle in the tray, or push the purple bowl. Quantitatively, we looked at, we pre-selected 28 held out tasks that the robot didn't see during training, and we evaluated performance on all of those different tasks. And we found that on 20 out of 28 of the held out tasks, we saw non-zero success, meaning that it was able to perform those tasks to some degree. And on average, there was a 32% success on these 28 held out tasks. So first, there's substantial signs of being able to do things that the robot wasn't trained to do. But of course, there's also considerable room for improvement. Now, we wanted to understand where is the room for improvement, and so we looked at what is the performance on different kinds of tasks and different types of conditioning. And we see an 8% gap between the success rate on training tasks versus held out tasks. Between 32 and 40%, we see a 2% gap if we condition on language versus on one-hot vectors, and a 58% gap in just performing control on the training tasks. And so this suggests that just actually getting the robot to figure out how to do tasks in the training data set is a main bottleneck. And we actually see this if we look at the failure cases. So for example, if we ask it to place a banana on the ceramic cup, this is one of the tasks that has a 0% success rate. It picks up the banana and almost gets it to the cup, but isn't able to successfully put it into the cup. And similarly, if we ask it to wipe the tray with a sponge, we see that it seems like it understands roughly what it's supposed to do, but it doesn't quite wipe the tray at the very last step. So fine-grained control is hard, and it was a bottleneck in this system. Great, so the takeaway here is that rather than having a robot learn one task from scratch, we can actually allow robots to do things that they weren't trained to do by training them on a more diverse set of tasks. Now, moving beyond this, I think a second important ingredient is not just for robots to generalize to things that are related to what they've done before, but actually to leverage that previous experience to learn faster and to learn new things more quickly. And so what I mean by this is oftentimes you don't just have a batch of tasks that you're given and then you want to solve a new task. In reality, robots will probably be faced with a sequence of tasks that they want to be able to solve. And we want algorithms that can not just generalize to new tasks, but basically learn each task faster and faster. And so what we're going to do is, when looking at this problem, we don't want to just train on each task from scratch. So we're going to restore the data from the previous tasks that the robot encountered when learning those tasks, pre-train a policy on that prior data, and then improve on the current task, both with online collection, online trial and error data, as well as incorporating some of that old data. And so unlike the previous setting where we're using imitation learning, here we're going to be back in a reinforcement learning setting. Now, one of the key challenges here is when you try to improve with online data for your new task, some of the previous data and previous experiences will be relevant, and some of the previous experiences won't be very relevant. And so the key idea in this work was to figure out, can we filter our previous experiences to only select the things that are most relevant to the tasks that we're learning? And we derived a pretty simple rule, kind of based on importance weights, that has two pretty simple terms. The first is just the ratio of the data set sizes. And this means that as you get more data for your current task, you're going to use less of your prior data. So this intuitively makes sense. And the second one is basically going to look at relevance. It's going to look at what is the likelihood that this data came from my current task and is relevant for my current task versus coming from the previous tasks. And you can implement something like this with a simple binary classifier by just trying to classify between your previous experiences and the experience from your current task. And we can then use this to define an importance weight that tells us, should we use this previous experience when trying to learn this new task? Great, so with this approach, we ran a reinforcement learning algorithm, not just from scratch on the current task, but reusing all of the data from all the previous tasks, but filtering that data and training on a mix of the filtered data and the data from the current task. And we studied this algorithm both in simulation and on a real robot to learn sequences of tasks. In this case, we started with somewhat simpler tasks where it needed to kind of mostly just reach a position, and then move towards slightly more complex tasks where the robot needed to insert the object all the way into the desired configuration. And the thing that's cool about this is by actually leveraging previous experience, the robot is able to learn a lot faster. So if you look at the kind of the learning curve as it has more experience averaged across these tasks, we see that training from scratch is the green curve here, and actually reusing and filtering the previous experience is a pink curve. And we see that we can learn twice as fast compared to training from scratch, and also ultimately reach a better solution than learning from scratch. So it's able to get to 0.75 centimeters from the goal position compared to 1.83 centimeters from the goal position. Great, so leveraging previous experience, I think, is also a really important ingredient rather than training from scratch. And I think that this should allow robots and intelligent systems to become more intelligent over time and accumulate experience rather than having a very narrow set of experiences for the current task. Now, the last thing that I'd like to touch on is in this reinforcement learning experiment and also the reinforcement learning experiments that I mentioned before, we assumed that we had a well-defined reward function for the task. And in a lot of cases, you don't have a reward function. The real world certainly doesn't give you a reward function. In these experiments, we actually just engineered a reward function for each of these tasks. And so I think it's important to think about whether robots can actually figure out how to explore an environment without being given a reward function, without being given something a priori. And so in particular, we want to just basically explore and collect data. And one way that we could do that is to use fairly random actions, like the video shown here. And you can collect a ton of data this way, lots and lots of broad experiences, but this data isn't very useful for learning complex tasks and complex behaviors. So we'd like to be able to collect more interesting data than this. Now, there's a whole set of methods in the AI literature for trying to seek out novelty, and this perhaps could be used to seek out more interesting behaviors. And so we actually took one of these methods that was at least state-of-the-art as of a couple years ago, and we ran it on the robot. And our goal ultimately was to get the robot to open one of the drawers at the desk, and we found that the robot wasn't really interacting with the drawers at all. It was mostly just kind of waving its arm in the air. And so what we wanted to be able to do is, I think that in general, when a robot interacts with the real world, there's so much going on in the real world. There's so many ways that you can explore the environment, and we wanted to understand whether a person could actually help the robot and show the robot the interesting things that it might be able to do in an environment. And so what we did is we basically had a person show examples of states that are interesting to the robot, like playing with the drawer. We did this at the very beginning, so the human isn't actually going to be in the loop of the exploration process. This is just done at the very beginning. And then once we have these interesting states, we will train a classifier to classify between interesting states and the data that the robot has already explored, and ultimately encourage the robot to explore to find images that are classified as interesting rather than images that are classified as its own experience. And when we ran this on the robot, we gave it interesting states of opening the drawer that's on the right here, and we found that after just 3 minutes of human guidance plus an extended period of autonomous exploration, the robot was able to collect data that explored the environment in a much more directed way to find the kinds of things that it was shown by the human. And quantitatively, if we look at kind of the number of episodes in which it interacted with the drawer in comparison to the prior novelty-seeking approach, we found that it was interacting with the drawer substantially more, even though we only gave it a very small amount of supervision. And then lastly, once we actually collected this data set, in actually a follow-up, a completely different project, we tested whether we could use that to actually learn a task like closing the drawer. So we, in this case, we do need to give it a reward function. So there wasn't any explicit reward function in the previous paper, but here to learn a reward function for closing the drawer, we're just going to label 200 images as open versus closed, train a classifier, and then run an offline RL algorithm on that data to maximize the probability that the reward is that the drawer is closed. And the result of that is this data that was collected without any reward signal, just the examples that were provided at the beginning, is useful for learning a policy that has around a 76% success rate at closing this drawer. Cool. So yeah, the takeaway here, I think, is that we don't necessarily need robots to be fully unsupervised, but we also shouldn't give them explicit reward functions either, and a small amount of human guidance, similar to how a parent might provide guidance to a child, I think can go a long way towards allowing robots to explore their environment. Now, lastly, I think that there's lots of open problems. These are just a few ingredients that I think are important to move beyond some of the typical approaches to learning a single task in a single environment. I think that these are some solutions to these ingredients, but there are probably many other solutions to allowing robots to generalize, leverage previous experience, and learn without reward functions. There's also lots of other ingredients as well. 20 minutes is only so long. And ultimately, we may also want systems that put the ingredients together as well for a single, more complete system. Great. I'd like to thank my students, and especially like to highlight Annie, Eric, Alex, Annie, and Suraj, who led the work that I presented. Thanks.
Chelsea, and congratulations on bringing on 20 minutes in the minute. Beautiful questions in the discussion period. And Ann Collins from UC Berkeley, I almost said Berserkly, is our next.
Thank you so much for inviting me, and I'd like to tell you a little bit about what insights we can get from cognitive sciences and cognitive neuroscience into the computations that support intelligent, complex behavior. As I think Chelsea's told us already, humans are still the benchmark over in many tasks that require intelligent, flexible behavior compared to artificial agents. We are able to very flexibly adapt to new situations, like having a brand new smartphone or computer, or figuring out how to change a diaper on a wriggly baby. And the past couple of years have shown us how flexible we can be in figuring out new ways of interacting with each other and new types of behavior. So intelligent behavior really necessitates this kind of fast and flexible learning, dynamic decision making. And what we cognitive scientists and cognitive neuroscientists try to do is to deconstruct, take humans and deconstruct the kind of computations that do so. We take lots of inspiration from AI, from the types of, from the algorithm that AI develops to do so. But my point today will be to say that I think AI can also get lots of insight from the work we do. So we do so by trying to deconstruct, really, what those computations are, assuming there's a brain behind this, and trying to understand what those computations are. And the key point I want to make today is that when we deconstruct those computations, we'll come up with mechanisms and processes, and we really can't tell ahead of time if those processes are bugs of evolution, or whether they're actually useful features that artificial intelligence should consider. And I think in many times they are useful features, but we need to consider both possibilities, and it's particularly important for bringing our fields together to know which ones are very valuable to explore. So today I'm going to give a few examples of such things that look at first like bugs that I think are actually features. I'll be talking about redundancy in processes that seem to be doing very similar things in parallel. I'll be talking about trade-offs, bottlenecks, and complexity. Okay. And in the lab, we don't study as complex things as changing a wriggly baby's diaper. We simplify those tasks to things that look like this. For example, 2 alternative false choices, where participants pick between 2 items, here an apple and a banana, and get to experience an outcome. For example, here the apple is tasty. And we study this often with the framework of reinforcement learning. Even very simple algorithms like this one that just updates the value of the apple in proportion to the reward prediction error can do a very good job at capturing people's behavior. Reinforcement learning is super popular for studying humans and animals, not only because it captures behavior well, but also because it's been shown to capture a neural circuit. So the dopamine is known to encode a signal that looks like a reward prediction error, and we have this network that involves corticostriatal loops that seems to encode policies or values. Okay, so reinforcement learning has been so successful that NIH thinks that reinforcement learning is solved, for example, and many of us tend to stop here. What I'll try to say today is that that's really not the case, and that we really need to go beyond that to really understand how flexible learning occurs. And even in super simple choices, that something that looks like a super simple choice, like picking between this apple and this banana, I'll argue that there's a lot of redundancy in the processes that support it. So I'll just give you intuitive examples, and then I'll dive a little bit deeper in how we can actually deconstruct those examples. So I've talked about reinforcement learning. You can make this choice by having built the cached value of an apple. You've experienced apples a lot, and in average you like them maybe 80% of the time, whereas you like bananas a bit less, and that can guide your behavior just by a cached preference value. Okay? But you could also maybe remember that your sibling told you that the apples were really yummy today, and use this short information in short-term memory to say, like, okay, I'm going to pick an apple today. You could also do some kind of more involved reasoning where you know that if you shopped at grocery store number A, apples tend to be good, whereas at grocery store B, bananas tend to be better. And if you know where you were today, that might guide your choice. Or you might remember a very specific past experience where you ate that apple and it was wonderful. And in this case, it would be episodic memory guiding your choice. Okay, so this is about as simple a decision-making task as you can get. And even in the simplest behavior, you can see that it is actually very complex, and so it is in a way sufficient to study more complex decision-making. And it relies on redundant processes. So how do we actually deconstruct the computations that support this? So I'll give the examples of those two types of learning, short-term working memory and reinforcement learning. So working memory and reinforcement learning tend to be studied separately, but you can look at them as two different sides of a trade-off. So working memory is a form of memory that allows you to store information very quickly with very detailed information and very flexible type of information, as opposed to reinforcement learning that learns things incrementally and in a very specific format, this cached value. By contrast, working memory has a very low capacity and is effortful, whereas RL has much broader capacity and is meant to be effortless. So we designed an experiment to try to explicitly pull those two apart in a learning task. So the experiment looks something like this, where a participant sees a stimulus on the screen, then makes a choice between 3 key presses, and in this case, for example, might randomly pick the index finger the first time, and then experiences feedback, and their goal is to learn from this feedback that's deterministic and truthful, which key they should press when they see the pumpkin. And then they might see another stimulus, and this might be iterated multiple times until they get it right many times. So in one block, they might be learning which key to press for either the pumpkin or the green beans. And then they'll go on to a different block where they'll learn about a different set of stimulus-action association, and we manipulate how many such stimulus-action associations they need to learn. Okay, and by doing so, we can test the role of reinforcement learning by seeing how the amount of reward they got influences how well they're doing in their choices, but also how they use working memory by seeing how many items they learn affects how well they do. Okay, so the very classic reinforcement learning models, if you apply them to this task, make a very null kind of prediction. It looks like this. This is a learning curve. It says essentially that you're going to learn all the stimulus associations at the same rate independently of how many you're learning in parallel, just because you're integrating the cache value of each stimulus action association at the same rate independently of each other. Subjects do something completely different, something that we've replicated many times now. Participants learn optimally for low set sizes. So there's 3 actions, so they experience everything once, twice, 3 times, and they are asymptotic performance. But the higher the set size, the more incremental the learning looks. Okay, something that can not be captured by classic reinforcement learning or any slight modification thereof, and can instead be explained much better if you assume 2 parallel processes, 2 redundant processes working in parallel. This RL process, that's slow and incremental, but also a working memory process that's very fast but decays quickly, and importantly is capacity limited. When you do that and put this into equations, you can capture the behavior really well. Okay, so we have those 2 redundant processes that might look like a bug, like a needless spending of energy. But in this case, it looks like this redundancy that's not perfect is actually useful in the sense that they mitigate each other's trade-offs. Working memory is limited in capacity, RL isn't, and vice versa. RL is slow, working memory is fast, so working memory helps you learn fast in low set sizes, and RL helps you learn everything that you wouldn't be able to learn with just working memory. Okay, so the question, so this tells us redundancy here is helpful, but it's helpful because those two memory systems have those trade-offs. So why do those memory systems have those trade-offs? Why couldn't we have a high capacity, high speed kind of memory system, for example? So we have two interesting trade-offs here. For example, this fast versus slow trade-off. Working memory, you can store something very well in a one-shot way, but RL is slow. You can see the example here of learning 5 things that is going to be mostly RL. And by having tried 15 times the same stimulus, you're kind of getting toward asymptote performance, right? So you need to iterate a lot until you get a good solid stimulus-action association. So why is RL not faster? Okay, well, fast working memory allows fast learning, which is probably essential in fast-changing dynamical environments, but could also imply lots of erasing or forgetting of things you've learned. By contrast, slow reinforcement learning might instead allow for robust long-term learning. And we know that when you have a noisy environment, for example, probabilistic rewards, something like that, you need to integrate over a length of time to get to an accurate estimate of things. And so having a slower learning here might allow you to get more accurate, long-term, more robust choices in the long term, which might be essential in stable environments. So we tested this in humans. We did the same experiment where participants learned across different set sizes. And then later on, after they had done 45 minutes of this and then an independent task, they were told, okay, now you're going to see all 78 stimuli that you saw before. So no way you can remember all of it explicitly. And you're going to have to pick the correct action and do your best, and you're not getting any feedback. Okay, so in the first part, this is where we're getting both working memory and RL, but putatively in this testing phase, there's no contribution of working memory anymore. When we do this, we replicate what we always do, which is we learn much faster in low set sizes than high set sizes. You can see this by here at the end of learning, we have a higher performance. Here we're plotting the difference. But now when you look at the test phase, so what you recall in the long term, we get the opposite effect. We get that what you have learned slowly, relying more on RL, putatively, is actually remembered much better, more robustly. So what it seems to have happened here is that using working memory to learn fast has blocked this long-term retention and enabled more long-term robust learning. Okay, so it seems in this case that the trade-off looks like it has a cost in one type of domain, but is beneficial in the other type of environment. And having that trade-off allows you to use the memory resource that is going to be more useful in a given environment, potentially. The other trade-off we have between those two systems is the capacity or the resource that is accessible. So something that's very striking with our working memory is how limited it is. RL has a broad capacity, but when we fit this model to data, we consistently get a very low capacity for a working memory that's consistent with a huge literature on working memory that you're able to remember something like 3 or 4 chunks. This is, for example, healthy controls in patients with schizophrenia. These are adolescents and adults. Everybody is around 3 or 3 or 4 or something like that. Okay, so why are we only able to remember just 3 or 4 well? This really looks like a bug, right? Like if you have a robot and lots of CPU, you can tell yourself, well, obviously I can, store more items, and that's obviously going to be better. So it could be a bug. We know that working memory is costly. Most models of working memory assume some kind of active maintenance, spiking neurons, which might be costly energetically, and which might be hard to maintain in recurrent neural networks in the brain, for example. So it's possible that our brain just hasn't evolved to give us more resources. And in this case, it would be irrelevant to AI. I'm going to make a case without much support that I think this might actually be a feature of working memory that should be taken somewhat seriously. Okay? And my idea here is that having a low capacity forces you to store what's relevant, right? And to discard what's not relevant. Okay? So it provides an information bottleneck. So consider this kind of scene that we as humans encounter all the time, and these days also autonomous agents try to make sense of. This is very high dimensional, it's very complex, but really if you're driving, what matters right now is only this dimension of the image, that you have a red light and you should stop. Okay, so, and if you need to maybe stop looking for a moment, what you need to remember is this red light, right? And so potentially having a bottleneck in active memory like this might force dimensionality reduction to the most relevant aspects of what you're doing. Todd, Niv, and Cohen actually showed something like this in a paper in 2009, showing that when you have a forced limitation to how much memory you can store, you have this inverse U-shape here, where by having a limited amount of memory, you're going to be able to make good use of memory, but if you have too much, then you're going to increase the curse of dimensionality, which is going to make decision-making and planning much harder. I think a potential second type of benefit of having low working memory capacity that forces dimensionality reduction is that it might force you to do generalization or clustering, right? You don't care that this specific scene has 3 or 4 cars, you just care that there's a red light, and you can identify all this as the same kind of situation that requires the same policy. Okay, which is why I think that potentially the low working memory capacity of humans is a feature rather than a bug. Okay, in the very last few minutes of my talk, I want to go the opposite direction. So we've talked about dimensionality reduction. I'd like also to say that I think dimensionality expansion or complexification might also be a very important feature of human intelligence that looks like a bug, but is actually a feature. So if you look at those 2 arrays and of random dots, and try to pick which one is actually uniformly random and which one isn't, humans are remarkably bad at this. They tend to think this one is really well spread out and is uniform, and this one has clumps. And actually, this one is random, and this one I distributed by hand. There's a lot of data out there that shows that people see structure where structure does not exist. This is an example of such a thing where participants just saw random black and white dots and were asked to press this for black and this for white. And the reaction times show a very clear structure where they tend to predict sequences of alternation or repetitions much better. So I'm searching for local structure. Okay, so people tend to try to see complexity or structure in the data where it does not exist, which seems to go against Occam's razor or against dimensionality reduction. This is also something I showed in reinforcement learning. Participants learning this kind of associations where you have 4 stimuli that you need to match to 4 actions that you should learn as 4 stimulus-action associations. We've shown repeatedly that people don't learn it this way. Instead, they learn it in a hierarchically structured way where they use one dimension to predict a rule, here a task set, and then each task set to predict stimulus-action associations. This is more complex. It requires more memory. But it has the benefit that if you get new colors, for example, you're going to, one of which corresponds to an old rule and one of which a new rule, you're going to be able to use this structure you built to generalize and learn faster when there's an opportunity to do so. However, it is costly, so if you compare learning this top line here compared to the bottom line, participants are worse, they are slower, and they make more mistakes. Okay? So it seems like humans have this default to search for complex structure and represent information in a way that's more complex than needed, which seems like a bug, but does enable generalization and transfer, something that we've seen is essential for better learning. Okay, so the idea here is that complexity might allow us, it looks like a bug, but is actually potentially an inductive bias that enables transfer and generalization, and may be resource optimal when we're working on low dimensional space. And I'd just like to point that this is an idea that I have also seen in the AI literature recently. Okay, so just to conclude, sorry I'm a bit over, to make flexible decision making, we start from high dimensional complex input. And what I think is that we have multiple systems that enable us to do that. For example, reinforcement learning might be working more directly with this complex input and allow slow and robust learning, while processes like working memory might create this kind of bottlenecks that create a small state space, allowing faster learning with lower cost of dimensionality, and also providing a higher capacity for generalization, which enables fast and flexible learning. And having this redundancy between those processes might be the key ingredient to arbitrating how we learn in different environments. Okay, so I hope I've convinced you that looking into the computations that support human intelligence and asking ourselves whether they're bugs or features might be helpful in trying to understand how to make more intelligent artificial agents. Thank you for your attention.
So I'm going to ask the speakers to join me up here by our virtual fire. We're deeply afraid of real fires in the state of California, so keep those out of the equation. And anyone who has questions, we have a microphone I see in that aisle, and we have a microphone here in this aisle. And please come to the microphone, and we'll get to as many of you as we can. And I'll start off the fun by asking some priming questions. Thank you for those lovely talks. And Chelsea, I wanted to start with you since you were the first talk. But my question that I really want to ask you has changed since I thought what I thought it would. I mean, your experiments showing that the sequential learning really has gains and that the robots can learn more quickly, I thought was fascinating. And a lot of people, probably quite a few in this room, are interested in this notion of compositionality, that chunks of behavior can be learned and then can be combined in new and interesting ways to create behaviors without having to learn every step of the way. And I guess I'm wondering, have you ever sort of taken apart the neural networks, reverse engineering the neural networks inside your robots after they've learned these things? And do you see evidence of conserved circuit elements or conserved motifs? Or is that an irrational question from a neurophysiologist?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question. Unfortunately, I personally feel like the interpretability tools and explainability tools in the deep learning literature are not very mature. I think it's very hard to look into these and understand exactly what's going on. And there's actually work that shows that methods that do try to visualize features can't distinguish between networks that actually make decisions in very different ways. And so I wish we could look into them more. Have we seen evidence of that beyond looking at inside the neural network? I think it's hard to say. I mean, certainly for the tasks in there, I wouldn't expect to see compositionality because they're pretty low-level motor skills. Yeah. I guess we have trained models that try to predict like video into the future, and we've seen some evidence there that they they can they sort of pay attention to certain aspects of the scene and move certain aspects of the scene. But I think it's hard to say in general.
Fair enough. I mean, the ones that I'm thinking about that I know a little bit about are smaller recurrently connected neural networks, like what David Cicillo works with and Xiaojing Wang to some extent. And most likely the ones that are inside your robots are hugely more complicated than that. But I don't know that for a fact. I don't know what's inside your robots.
They're probably more complicated to some extent, but also, I mean, they may also, I think that one thing that's challenging about machine learning is it's going to try to find the easiest way to solve the task. It's performing an optimization, and the way that you set up the task, if you set up a simple task, or something that may appear complex to us, but is actually very simple, then it's going to find shortcuts and ways to do that. And so they may not be as complex as you think. And I think it's actually really important to set up tasks that are complex to force it to actually learn something harder than simple pattern recognition.
You want to comment on that, David?
I want to actually ask Chelsea a question, follow-up question. Because Anne showed very nicely how some of these limitations can force components to do things like generalize. I mean, have you ever tried pre-defining pieces and forcing limitations of things like identifying objects first and then actually building the secondary components rather than kind of just throwing it all at the network?
Yeah, so having a sort of pipelined approach where you first recognize objects and you estimate the properties of those objects and then do something on top of that, that's a really long-standing approach in robotics that's been tried for decades and decades. And the challenge is that errors propagate. So if your object detector or whatever isn't quite accurate in a certain way, and the downstream components kind of assume that it will be accurate in that way, then it becomes very, very brittle.
Yes, with the old symbolic AI, but if you're building symbolic AI out of sub-symbolic components, don't you get the sub-symbolic advantage that you've got in the modern neural nets?
I think if you could optimize everything end to end, then certainly. That means you need to differentiate through all the components, and that may be difficult in certain scenarios. If you can't differentiate and backprop end to end, then the errors that one system makes aren't going to be optimized for the downstream task. And that's where things get tricky, because you don't need to precisely understand the shape of an object in order to manipulate it. There are heuristics that you can use, and there's heuristics that I think neuroscience has shown that people use for catching balls, for example. And that's important because motor control is really hard.
So please come to the microphones and join the discussion. But this exchange here raises a question I wanted to pose to Anne. It's along the same theme. So Anne, if you had a tame and friendly AI colleague, and I know those are rare, but there are probably a few in this room, and you really got down to brass tacks, with the things that you're presented here, making an argument that some of these apparent inefficiencies in human working memory or whatever are really features and not bugs, and that they're there, they've evolved, and they're there for a reason, and they're important for human cognition. And you went to your friendly AI person and said, if you would only do this, you could increase the power, flexibility, generalization of your machine in ways that you would not expect. I believe that from my data. What would that be? What would you want the AI person to do?
I actually think that it's certainly not a single thing. I mean, I think the single most important component is the fact that we have so many redundant processes that do different things that, provide, in a sense, an ability to find a good process in any different situation. So I was thinking, actually, when Chelsea was saying earlier that errors propagate, if you're shaping the problem in the wrong way, that if you had, in parallel, a different, a different network that had been trained slightly differently or with slightly different reward functions or something like that, and that they were both able to contribute jointly, that you might actually avoid this kind of getting stuck in suboptimal policies. But I don't know if Chelsea will agree with that.
So we have a question. Let's get the audience into the fun. Tell us your name and where you're from, and then ask your question, please. Hang on just a minute. We're
do you hear me?
there we go.
Yeah. My name is Sung Lee. I came from the South Korea, the Sungkyunkwan University, and I have a question to the Professor Finn. Is this the right way to asking questions? Right? Okay. Thanks for the impressive talk, and I have two questions about you. And the first question is, nowadays there have been the very increasing and impressive results from the DeepMinds and OpenAI in the simulation world. It seems like in the simulation world, the artificial agent really can do multiple tasks and many tasks like that. But when we came out into the real world, it seems like they are not really doing well. So first question is, what do you think is the very big difference in the simulated world and the real world? And the second thing is, as I know that there are increasing the studies that trying to leverage the knowledge of the world, something like developing the world models or training them to about the physics rules, so that they can really managing that information to the real world task. So since the robotic task really connecting to the physical rules of the world, so are you also concerning to applying these kind of approaches to your field? Thanks.
Yeah, so for the first question, regarding simulation, there's a good quote that, I can't remember who it's from, but that simulations are doomed to succeed.
Sorry, the what?
Simulation is doomed to succeed.
Oh.
And there are so many things that make simulation easier. We prototype a lot in simulation. Simulation is a very great tool for that, but I guess there's two paths for trying to replicate those results in the real world. One is to try to learn them in simulation and then transfer them. And there's a huge gap between physics in simulation and reality. It's like things like people who make video games, they optimize the physics so that they look good, but not so that they're accurate. And actually, they're different. And so there's a huge gap. And then the alternative approach, which I like more, is to actually just try to have robots learn in the real world and basically apply that learning in the real world rather than in simulation. But there's all sorts of assumptions that a lot of people make when they're only working in simulation. They assume that they have access to a reward function, or they can access the underlying state of the simulator, or that they can reset the world to any possible state. And a lot of those things aren't true in the real world. And I think that also incorporating those things into the learning procedure makes for a more interesting problem. When you can't reset the world to any possible state, the robot has to be much more autonomous. And autonomy, I think, is actually a pretty fundamental aspect of intelligence. So yeah, there's all sorts of challenges. Those are a few of them. Regarding your second question of learning world models, it's actually an approach that I've used quite a bit. I didn't cover it in any of the work I talked about today, but learning to predict, I think it's a really promising approach because you learn so much more about the world than for any given task. And so it's something that I'm really excited about. There are challenges, and basically learning that model of the world, learning to predict the future in pixel space is really, really challenging. And it's something that we're working on, though, and I think it's something that I'm optimistic about.
Thank you.
Go ahead. And tell us your name and where you're from.
Yeah, I'm Sammy. I'm an AI engineer in the industry. And
Are you tame and friendly?
am I what?
Tame and friendly?
Most of the time, when I'm well fed. Anyway, I'm an AI engineer in industry in Los Angeles. I was interested in the kind of confluence of two different approaches that you three were discussing. David, you were talking about, doing symbolic things using sub-symbolic systems, and it seemed like the response there was, well, that's, you kind of need to be able to take those pieces and then train them together end to end, which, in AI we would call transfer learning, or some kind of, take some pre-trained model and then a downstream task, maybe add a downstream classifier, except with more components, right? Transfer learning on, on next level. And then, and you were mentioning the dual process model, is very reminiscent of ensemble methods, and training many different models to solve a problem, and then some kind of voting strategy, which itself would be, could itself be some additionally trained network that learns when each model is most appropriate. So, that context is just to say that it seems like there are methods in AI that are relevant to what we're talking about here. And my question is, do we care? Because similar to the simulation is doomed to succeed, we could find a thing that works, which, I love to do, AI engineer. I would love to find, make this cool thing that works. How optimistic is each of you about how likely pursuing those techniques is likely to lead us to insights? And by those techniques, again, I mean these, AI-specific, let's solve the problem using these fancy models, which I, again, love. I'm not, anyway. How optimistic are you that newer types of transfer learning or newer types of ensemble methods will teach us stuff about cognition? I'm going to go sit down now.
Oh, it's a great question. I think that there's two things I think that need to be said. First of all, one has to ask what one's goal is, right? Is one trying to understand how the human brain works? Is one trying to build a better machine, right? Airplanes and birds both fly. They both push the air, but most birds don't have jet engines. And if your goal is to create a jet airplane, understanding birds gets you so far, but not to the point where jet fighters are happening. But I think the other thing that's really important is not to forget that we're not coming in tabula rasa. Humans are not tabula rasa. We've known that now for many decades. And there are millions and millions of years of evolution. People generally really underestimate the amount of evolution that has gone on and the scale of that to produce the baselines that we're talking about in species, whether they be mice, rats, undergrads, humans, whatever. And I think that what we have is, if your goal, on the other hand, is to have a system that is as robust as humans, then you probably do need to look at what evolution has got you to jumpstart that. And I think that there's pretty good evidence that there's more than, I love the examples Anne was giving about the two systems kind of being in balance, but I think there's good evidence that there's at least a few other systems as well that are kind of